how many people already knew they had extraordinary experiences, but if anyone with a credentialed degree would talk to that, they would be completely dismissed. And so they just put all that stuff underground, even though we have this incredible corpus of knowledge that exists.
And now all of a sudden, people are having big spiritual experiences, learning how to work with their body, learning how to open up their channel and move energy.
Women were set on fire for it. It wasn't just not encouraged. It was really punished. There's so much wisdom and insight that we hold that we have suppressed. It's been literally tested and proven, and even government funding have gone against that stuff. So why would we bury the thing that is actually now the portal to greater understanding of how this all works? Every single industry being up for redesign. Healthcare, education, finance, even marriage. We can start to look at every single system around us from a different lens that isn't from this old industrial playbook, but is from this lens of the quantum future.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Mission Daily. I'm your host, Stephanie Postles, and I just got done with a very wild interview with a new friend, Nancy Giordano. So I met Nancy at South by Southwest. She was up on the stage talking about quantum computing and quantum philosophy and consciousness, and I was like, wow, who is this woman? And so when she was introduced as a strategic futurist. And at first I was like, what is that? Like, I don't even understand what you're doing. But then when I saw the vastness of all the worlds that she plays in, it totally makes sense now. And so in this interview, I knew I had to get her in studio because I wanted to hear more, where we talked about things like women remembering and the ancient wisdom that has always been in us. And for some reason, these things are being remembered right now in the time period that we're in. And so it's the rise of the feminine, the breaking of structures, business is changing, society is changing, the way that we relate to people is changing, everything is up for question. And so Nancy and I dove into that in the interview today. And with that, we also talked about repatterning and thinking about what is society of the future going to look like, this beautiful intersection of this new quantum future we're in, where it's combining quantum computing along with quantum philosophy, which is super interesting. Because it really shows this future of feminine, which she talks about a lot, of like science mixed with consciousness, blending it all together, and then bringing out this new feminine reality and way that we operate in the future. And for all my male listeners out there, I know I have a lot of you. When I say feminine, that does not just mean a woman. It's a feminine, masculine way of thinking and operating and moving through life. And a man can also have feminine qualities in him, just like a woman can have masculine qualities. So don't let that filter you out by hearing the word feminine. So stick around because this interview is all encompassing. We're going to be talking about parenting, business, somatic wisdom, and even the power of water and what it has in store for you. So with that, let's get into it. All right.
Yay.
Nancy, welcome to Mission Daily.
Hi, I'm so excited to be with you.
I am too. It's kind of wild thinking of how we got here, of my team reaches out to you, which I didn't even realize. And I see you speaking up on stage and I'm like, I'm going to go see her. So now you're at my house.
Yay.
I mean,
and to the
good.
various mutual connections that we keep weaving together, which is fun.
I know. I feel like there's definitely an interesting life that's coming that we're building.
Totally.
Just don't know where it's going yet, but it's fun.
It starts today.
It starts today. So I want to start with this idea that I think I heard you talk about at South by around the kind of like the rise of the feminine. And when you said it, you were relating it to other things, which we will get into, quantum consciousness, quantum computing. It was super interesting. But I want to just start with this concept of the rise of the feminine. Like, what does that mean to you? And why is that important right now?
It is interesting because there's a whole bunch of other contexts, right? That does, I feel like you need to kind of feed into that. And I'll just start with, again, my work is, I think of myself primarily as a strategist. I'm really good at being able to sense make and put pieces together and see missing parts or see patterns. And I always go with this compass, which is what does the future need and expect, and what are you unique position to create and contribute to that. And I think I've just been really fortunate to see that this is the big gap, right? Is that I am in the world of technology, I'm in the world of business. I talk a lot about societal shifts and changes. We talk about consciousness. Like those are the four, areas that I get to, pollinate between. But what you see constantly is the either the ignorance or the exclusion or the not, making use of this incredible body of wisdom that exists that sits inside the feminine story. And so I think that I ended up going to women's college, which I didn't realize at the time was probably really, really formative. It gave me a lot of confidence to be the only woman on the stage in most of the events that I go to, and the only woman in the room in a lot of the discussions that I have, and to recognize that that point of view is actually really, really valuable, right? Not just as Nancy, but as a woman. in that space and being able to see the way other women react to that when I'm on the stage or in the room. One woman who, after I gave a talk to a very elite group of consultants, came over and she hugged me, right? Because she's like, God, it's so hard always being the only woman in the room. And why is that? Because we bring an intelligence, we bring a way of looking at things that I think are really, really needed and are often, again, dismissed. And I think in this moment in time, this idea of looking at the whole, being able to look, to your point, across all the intelligences that exist inside our bodies, being mothers, not just of our own children, but thinking about the community and thinking of the earth. Like these are all the wisdoms that are more relevant than ever. And when people talk about the future, they often only quote men or give examples of male accomplishments. But when you really go back to history, you realize how many women had been parts of those things and had been ignored for one reason or another. So we're also trying to correct that. Yeah. So I think when I think about the rise of the feminine, I think about the past, which is that we're trying to correct the stories and the mythologies, the present, which is how do we set up structures so that women can thrive in these environments. And then I think about the future, which is how will the value be created and how important it is that we make sure that women are included in that, right? Both in terms of the design of it so that it's more, hopefully, it's healthier and more stable, but also that we get compensated for it, right? You don't want a whole economy that's really based on a very homogenous group of people getting to the algorithm first. And so I think I've doubled down on how important it is that women's voices are in the work.
Yeah, so tell me the difference, or if you have a difference between female versus feminine.
Yeah, I actually, and it's interesting, they do end up crossing, right? So part of it is literally having women in the room.
Yes.
But the thing that I probably am the bigger proponent of is feminine thinking, which comes through the form of both both men and women, right? We have many men who have, can connect to feminine values of community and connection and empathy and vulnerability and all those words that we've been learning. And there's the very successful leaders. Satya Nadella at Microsoft has historically been a really, really great example of bringing his full humanity to his work and being such an extraordinary leader. And we have examples of women who deny their femininity and show up and cloaked in this thing that they think they're supposed to be, which is following the path of what the masculine design has been. And so I don't think it is specific necessarily to men and women. I'd like to transcend that. However, there's a reality that women aren't enough in the room. And so what we're trying to do is make it more possible for them to be. And the invitation I keep getting when I talk about these things is for women to realize they can be whole. Right? It's amazing how many women come up to me, like that woman who hugged me, who was a very, very senior executive, or a young woman who I met at CES who's building a waste management solution. She's in the world of waste tech, very masculine world. And I said something about this work that I do in Costa Rica with this group of women. And she's like, wow, the fact that you can combine both your spirituality and your leadership in business or in technology. She's like, I want to get to that point. So giving ourselves permission to be whole in the work that we do. I've been very visible about being a mother since the minute I became pregnant. I reorganized my work schedule from the early days to be a 4-day-a-week mom, even in really, really competitive industries. I've made very visible when I was pumping, right? I made visible like everything I was doing because I felt like this is the value that I'm bringing to this. I don't want to shut it down. I want it to be like fully on display. And so I've been either fortunate or deeply committed to the fact that these are just an integrated part of how we show up. And it's important that we make it more visible and give more women, not permission, but invitation to join us in that.
Yeah, I love this. I love when you said bringing like a more humanistic element back to our lives. And this is actually a theme I've heard among many guests throughout many of our shows, is like bringing the humanness back to life. And that's what's going to be the most valuable thing of the future, is not what you can do in your productivity and how many things you can knock out in a day, but like, can you feel someone's energy? Can you have empathy and compassion and know without hearing words? And can you, work between like your mind and your heart and your sacral system? Like, can you balance that to be able to connect with people in different ways that's not just from logic anymore?
And so that you don't feel so threatened. I think a big portion of that right now is that we have to feel pretty secure about the world that we're in and the value that we bring to it, so that these changes that are coming don't throw us so far off. And the more that we can get really grounded in that and really understand who we are and how, and all the capacities that we have to be able to sense change and to be able to have strengths to make a new contribution, I think come from that. There's a model that I use when I give talks that talks about sort of this nested system between employee or professional, human, and then member of society. And I think it's that nested system that we need to pay more respect to. So yes, we always talk about who we are as professionals, and that's certainly how we've been validated a lot in society, but we have forgotten that we are also humans and that are not just bringing these wisdoms, but are also going through this as mothers and fathers and sons and daughters and community people. We bring fears, we bring curiosities, we bring excitement, we bring knowledge, we bring backgrounds. Like, it's so important that that's integrated into the work. Those values have to show up in the work, and that we recognize that we're a member of society. And when we can have that aligned, we can make much faster decisions, and they stand the test of time. We don't get so stressed out.
Yeah.
So to your point, that integrity that goes all the way through of looking way out and way in, it's a thing that makes it possible to be able to navigate change much faster and much more securely.
Yep. So how would you guide someone? I'm just imagining you at this most recent speaking event. You have all these women in the room. How would you guide them to get there?
I think partly it's being the person on the stage, right? I was the only woman on the stage across the 2 days, the main stage. And so I think partly just it goes back to representation, right? Seeing you there, seeing a woman of a certain age there too, right? That I'm also really proud of my age. And I really feel like this is a sort of golden era for women in this age group. And so I think that's also important. And I think just being able to make points visible. In my talks, I talk about the gaps between men and women and the opportunities that exist right now. I talk about where the data shows this versus that. I make a point when people talk about, the value of work and the future of work and what that means, how there's a masculine lens to it and a feminine lens to that. And so I just make it, it just isn't integrated in the way I think, right? I'm not trying to be a warrior in one dimension or another. It's just, I want to make it visible so that we have more opportunity. I'm here just trying to release potential and reduce suffering. That's it.
Yeah.
And so how do we get there? And so I think by just being really clear in it and living it, it gives permission for other people. It goes back to that Marianne Williamson line. When you let your light shine, you unconsciously give other people permission to do the same.
Yeah.
You just live it.
That's good. That's good. What are some of the top questions you get? I know you also talk to a lot of organizations, big companies. Like, what are they asking you for? And why are they bringing you there?
They're bringing me there, honestly, because I think they want somebody who's optimistic about the future and isn't scaring everybody.
Which is very crucial.
Right?
It's very needed right now. I feel like there's doom everywhere that people are like, we're not going to make it. I'm like, right. That's not helpful. I don't think that's very helpful.
And we may not make it in this form, which is awesome because it means that there's an opportunity for another form. So I think it's also not being so attached to the fact that everything's going to be just fine the way it is. So what does it mean to be able to shift and move into something that could be very different, but also could be much better? So I think being able to open, I think people are relieved when they hear me speak. When they hear other people speak, there's a lot about either technology that's changing or about how they as talent, employees, professionals, leaders need to change. And it all feels really overwhelming. And when you can walk in and say, but look at all the things that are already happening, that are breakthroughs, that are extraordinary. And yesterday, I did it live in the room, which I haven't done before, which is this model that I have around 4 feelings around the future. Like, if it's not just positive or negative, but what am I relieved by? What am I inspired by? What am I frustrated by? What am I frightened by? Which is a very simple, almost like redoing of the SWOT analysis. And in real time, we did it. So people in the room could talk to what are they relieved by? Because remembering that you are relieved by the fact that you can connect with anybody in the world right now if you wanted to. You are relieved by the fact that I can learn anything almost for free online if I have access to the internet, which at least 67% of the population does, and soon 90% of the population will, right? That's extraordinary. The fact that we have medical breakthroughs that are happening every day that are just mind-blowing is amazing, right? And then what are you inspired by? What are the things that are happening that you want to go and build with or do something with, and reminding people of that? And then we talk about what we're frustrated and frightened by. But I think often what we're trying to help people do is check their narrative and their story. And it's so often bogged to the bottom of those 2 things. And even if it is, even if your worldview is to be super, super dark, right? It's okay. What does that motivate you to go do? Most of what I've created and built in the world is because I got frustrated, right? We created the Femme Futurist podcast because I was frustrated that women weren't given enough voice and so much of this futurist thinking and on stages and in quotes. And so let's go interview the women that are out there building the future and make that more visible, right? And I make that visible on every one of my talks. So I wrote a book because I was frustrated that, business leaders were still working with such an outdated way of thinking from the industrial era and trying to apply that to the world of exponential breakthroughs and technologies. And I felt like not only was that slow, but it was really dangerous to do that. So I wrote a book, right? So the things that we are also motivated from a dark place often open tremendous possibilities. I think even making that invitation visible to people is hopeful.
Yep. Yeah.
It doesn't take a lot to just say, remember, you're in control of this. It is not all happening to you.
Yep. You are literally creating the reality all around you.
Right. And that becomes the next question or the next opportunity, which is what can you actually see? Right. And what information is coming in and how are you allowing or not allowing that information in? And I think you and I talked earlier, about this idea of somatic awareness. So many of my friends are really moving into that too. Like, what is your body both telling you and allowing you to see or feel? Like, if you only hold it up here, there's only so much that you can take in, right? So the body's becoming a really interesting area of input and wisdom and knowledge, and certainly consciousness. When we talk about what it is that we can really start to expand to see, and that gets us into, the world of quantum and some other things. But I think we're really gonna. That to me is the biggest untapped potential, is that there's so much wisdom and insight that we hold that we have suppressed, right, as a society for many, many years. Indigenous cultures had that back in the day, certainly women had this much deeper than intuition is a really, really deep, deep wisdom. And we're now recalling it and we're remembering it. Like, how amazing is that?
Yeah,
right?
I do find it very interesting now when I look around at a lot of women, at least, they're remembering things in a way that they weren't 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And it's kind of like it wasn't allowed for some reason, or there wasn't the space for it, or it wasn't required then. And now all of a sudden, people are having big spiritual experiences, learning how to work with their body, learning how to open up their channel and move energy, and also like healing from it, like figuring out.
I mean, women were set on fire for it, right? It wasn't just like it was not encouraged. Like it was really punished. And there's a great book called The Chalice and the Blade, written by Riane Eisler in the 80s. It's just, you listen to that book and you get so angry as a woman, because you're like, it wasn't like it just like it sort of happened this way. There was a very, a intentional campaign to wipe out this wisdom and intelligence that uniquely comes through the feminine body. And so, all right. The good news is we can reclaim that. And in doing so, also reclaim, to your point, the full humanity for men and for women, because that knowledge was also stamped out for men, or the contribution for that was in society absolutely vilified. And so now, the game is different, man. The playing field is certainly changing. And I think that we have ridden that story to the end. Yeah. Right. And at some point now, we're ready for the next chapter of it.
Yeah. I know, at least from my own personal experience, when I was working to listen more, listen to the universe, listen to whatever you want to call it, it took about like a year or two of me clearing out who the hell even knows what that was. It just feels like past things, ancestral things, trauma in the body. It was so noisy. And I can see why it would be easy for many women to stop at that first 10% mark of like, that was hard, whatever it took to get there. I understand this concept, but this was really hard. And it's just worth it and hard to like work through that to get to the space.
They're also sometimes in systems where they just don't get a lot of either support, or there's really a lot of fear around that, right? If you aren't economically independent and you're in a household that doesn't support that thinking, that's a very, very scary thing to do.
Oh,
right?
yeah. I mean, most women that I know, I think about even my mom, she would tell me about these certain spiritual gifts that she had. And I'm like, why didn't you talk about them? She's like, well, your dad didn't believe me. And I'm a teacher and blah, blah. I'm like, this is very important.
Well, it's a combination, right? So if your partner, your spouse doesn't, or your family, right? Your parents think you're crazy. And then you go into any kind of environment. Like, there hasn't been a single environment that supported that way of thinking. And that's why you go to another book called Extraordinary Knowing, which is for me a great, great book. And it talked a lot about in the medical community, right? How many people already knew they had extraordinary experiences, but if as any scientist or anyone with any kind of credentialed degree would talk to that, they would be completely then dismissed in the rest of their work. And so they just put all that stuff underground, even though we have this incredible corpus of knowledge that exists, right? And it's been literally tested and proven, and millions of dollars of even government funding have been gone against that stuff. So why would we bury the thing that is actually now the portal to greater understanding of how this all works and how we can all live in harmony together? I mean, it just seems like, now's the time. So that's why, to me, the real interest in things like plant medicine, for sure, meditation, breath work, body work, astrology, right? That we're all going back into it, which is not surprising, because in moments of tremendous change and upheaval, we're looking for something that gives us more guidance or answers or grounding, right? But I love that because it feels like this, we're going back now to some of these sources of intelligence and reclaiming them.
Yeah. I mean, I know that I mentioned this to you before, but what's interesting is I do see a lot of men interested in these things now, not for self-serving reasons, but more of just like, this is interesting and I'm ready to also follow and let women step in. And like, it does feel like this rise of the feminine, at least my friend group. I think we talked about this. Like maybe we have different friend groups, but many of the men in my group are like looking to the women for like, as the oracles, as the ones with the knowledge, and like show us what we should be doing in this system, which, like I said, maybe Austin's a bubble, but very open-minded and different here.
Austin partly is a bubble, and there's you're within a bubble within Austin, right? Because there's also a group of people moving to Austin
Feels so
who
good.
don't necessarily who find that as a threat. Yeah. Right. And are really
I don't hang out with them, I guess.
And desperately trying to hold on to their position and their power. And so there's a lot, someone described it, I think it's the extinction event or something the other day, but this idea that is what's happening right now, certainly in the US and other parts of the world, where there's just like this like last gasp of trying to hold on to control and domination and of people and of systems and of nature as a way of being able to make sure that they can maintain that position of status or whatever it is, that story that tells themselves that that's how they're supposed to show up, and that it's all, it's like duct taping a bridge that's falling. Like it just is not going to work, but it is painful because we're not letting it naturally evolve to the place that it wants to go. And but also in nature, the tension between light and dark and between this energy and that energy exists, right? Anything that was all one also has its own it becomes stale or stagnant, and so it does need that dance between the two. And so I spend a lot of time ruminating on or thinking about the dance between dark and light. All right. And as something becomes more dramatic in one, it calls to the other to match it. Yeah. And so I do think that this is the moment that we're in. And so I think, to your point, because there is so much breaking down and there is so much like aggressive energy, it is calling to the alternative, right? And both men and women to show up in a different way, to be able to balance it out, which is awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it's when I think about that contrast, it's hard for me to ever be mad at many things that are going on, because I'm like, I think that this is here for a reason and it's here to bring out this other thing. And while I might not like it or it might not feel good, what else is it empowering? Right. And I mean, even with like, if you think of consciousness, if you believe that consciousness is like us coming here to experience ourselves, which means you do have to do the quote unquote bad things, the good things, you got to swing on the pendulum and be like, whoa, that was too far. Oh, that like, you got to feel it all. And so it's hard to see many of these things as bad versus like, maybe it's just shifting now and you needed what we had. Like you need the structures.
I think about that a lot, but I also think about it in terms of privilege, right? That I'm in a very privileged position to not be as stressed out about some certain things or to not be so afraid, right? I'm not at the edge of being dumped across the border to some hellish prison that I shouldn't be in for no reason. I have enough economic stability right now. I am not sick. I'm not relying on a lot of government services. So for people who I think are in much more vulnerable positions, the question is, how do you still hold on to that level of belief and consciousness? And so this idea of locus of control, which is what I keep going back to, even people who have been in prisoner of war camps or people who've been through war, if you believe you still have a sense of agency in it, that you still believe that you can impact it somehow, even if just by your attitude, have much better outcomes than the people who feel like they're victims to it, no matter how great their circumstances are. So part of it is privilege of circumstance, and then part of it is really tuning into your sense of competency and possibility in it. I think it's just really, really critical. So I'm kind of yes and.
Yeah. No, it is an interesting thought too of how to keep people out of victim consciousness too. And yeah, I mean, I went to a whole training here in Austin where that was a big thing that showed up for people when they were getting feedback from the group of like victim. I got it myself as well. Victim. I was like, oh shit. And I didn't realize how I was speaking about something. And it was very helpful getting that feedback, where now I can't really ever enter into that place, no matter what terrible thing is happening in my life or how stressful anything is. It's like hard to be in a victim state anymore because I got that feedback. I'm like, how to transfer that to people, just listening to their words and how they speak and how they're thinking of like
all of that.
Yeah. It's just,
all of that. I mean, I think a lot about, we talk about big macro change, but I also go back to the micro things that literally how we speak about to ourselves, right? About ourselves. There was one moment where I was doing something and I was hiking down some thing in Costa Rica and I slipped and fell and I started saying something really awful to myself. And I'm like, wait, just a moment here. Like, seriously? Like, you would never say that again to a friend, or you'd never. And again, I know this, right? And I've been taught this, but somehow in that moment, I've reverted right back to the critic, right? The really harsh judge about how I should have known that rock was going to be slippery or whatever the hell it was. And you're like, wow, that was not compassionate at all, right? And that flip, man, is so, so powerful. Because if you can start there, then certainly it radiates out and you walk into the whole system differently and holding it differently. It doesn't mean that anybody who knows me knows I have like the shortest patience ever, right? And I can be really judgmental about things. I'm in no way a Buddha when it comes to this, but at least I try and take some responsibility for it when I see it happening.
Yep, that's good. That's good. So, okay, when I saw you at South by, because we're talking about consciousness here, I want to shift it into quantum consciousness. And I just want to maybe start with definitions and also how you got into this space.
Yeah, can I start with that one first? Because I think it was really interesting that, every year South by is here in Austin. I've been privileged to be part of contributing to South by for probably 15 years in a row, but almost never because I submit a panel and it gets selected.
Okay.
But because I've got this relationship with Hugh, who knows that I kind of traffic in these, interesting edge spaces. And so he was building a quantum track this year because he really felt like now is the time when we can start to enter into that understanding more broadly, and asked if I would do one specifically on quantum and women. And I'm like, sure, but I'm not going to do one on the hidden figures of quantum. Like, and here's like this person who's, or people who have roles in quantum that have to be women. Like that to me is not the interesting conversation. What's really interesting is what does quantum in and of itself and the properties of it align with the way the feminine mind thinks. And so there was this really interesting blend that happened. And part of it is I did start out with the hidden figures portion of it. And I do think it's really interesting to understand that, if you go back and read anything about what quantum science is, it is defined almost exclusively by Western European and American men who in the 1930s got credit for discovering these various things that they didn't understand and couldn't figure, like they saw the phenomena happening, but couldn't figure it out or couldn't believe it. And even to the point where I always feel like we need to give credit to Einstein's wife, or first wife, who was considered a savant mathematician, Mileva Marek, I think is her name. Just had a huge contribution to make to the work, and for all kinds of life reasons. I don't think that men back then really were trying to do it to grab the glory. I think they were doing it because they were trying to bring to their peers a very, very challenging new way of thinking about physics. And they felt, again, that they would be drummed out of their professional circles if they didn't do it with the full authority. And by adding a woman's name to the paper, it would have potentially diminished its reception amongst its peers. So I have empathy for the fact that some of these women weren't included, but her contribution should not be should be remembered, right? And should really be considered an important part of the body of the work. So I think, again, remembering the women who did it historically, as well as women who are now contributing to it in real time. So first of all is like, okay, recognizing that. Then the second is recognizing, well, there are women who are contributing now to the field of both science and quantum computing, which we'll talk about separately in a second. And they're asking really different questions because they're coming from a much more innate sense of quantum philosophy. So if you think about the three different distinctions, right? Quantum science is literally what happens with a photon and how it energetically, shifts or not in subatomic level. So when you go beyond, so the physics that we're used to, you go to this other level of physics and you see a really different kind of phenomena happen. Something can exist in multiple positions, this idea of superposition. So it's not a fixed position, one or the other. It depends on the observer and the moment in which it is, sort of sequestered as to what that reality is, which is really mind-boggling and paradigm shifting. And this idea of entanglement, that these things can move in sync with one another, even though they're not connected or related to one another. I think Einstein described it as spooky occurrence or spooky something at a distance. Because he was like, this is happening and I don't understand it. There was a movie back in the day called I Am that showed two cells and they were moving in, one would move this way and the other one would move in. They moved in sync even though they were apart. So how does that happen? What does this idea of entanglement mean? And so people are trying to take those properties now and put them into quantum computing, which allows for all different ways of being able to solve for more complex problems, particularly science systems problems, because really it's considered sort of the science of nature. So you think about big complex weather systems or big complex, any kind of fully integrated systems, it changes the number of variables that you can work with to be almost infinite, which is just, again, extraordinary. And what will become more excited about as our understanding increases is that it won't be that we're switching from classical computing to quantum computing, but this is a new horsepower that will be added to the mix, and we'll decide some problems are solved this way and some problems are solved that way. So that's really cool. And then you go into quantum philosophy, which again is the big questions part of it, which is, well, what does it mean if we're like really entangled with one another, right? How do systems shift and change if we do that? What does it mean to be the observer and bring alternate realities to things and be able to look at things from all these different perspectives? And if I change my position as an observer, will I have a different outcome? Like these are really, really big philosophical questions about humanity and humankind that are really, anyone who's been in any way in the consciousness world has already experienced and felt, and now feels like the science is catching up. I used to tease my oldest son, who's an aerospace engineer. I'm like, Mama believes this. Someday you'll figure it out from a quantum perspective.
I say that all the time. I'm like, a lot of these like more spiritual woo concepts, things that you've just seen in a meditation or embodied in a plant medicine experience, science proves it later. And I'm like,
totally. And I've been that since I was a little kid. Like I've always believed in, past lives and the sort of the energy between people. And partly maybe it's because my mom was was comfortable sort of in that space, but also just because it feels so natural. Like it just feels crazy not to believe that. It's just so clear to me that that's how this exists. And so it is really fun to see the science catch up in the explanation of it. But it's interesting, the different groups that I talk to. If I speak to a highly, business-oriented group or technology group, they're really trying to wrap their head around the philosophy. And if you go into the more woo group, they're like, oh, no, we totally get that. But explain to me now how this like happens to impact computing and what kinds of problems we can go solve for. So it depends on kind of where you walk into. But the thing that I think is the most exciting is when you really look at the properties that exist inside a quantum field, whether that's science, philosophy, or computing, it is naturally aligned with a more feminine perspective. It is around emergence, fluidity, relationality, connectivity, right? Like all the things that, again, if you're in touch with your feminine side, let's just put it that way, or your feminine wisdom, are naturally inclined to that way of thinking. Like that to me is really exciting, that we're moving away from the thing about power and speed and control and dominance. I talk a lot about this opportunity to repattern in the future. We get to reinvent and redesign it all. Why would we do it? Just start dragging the old stuff into, this new way. And so it opens up our way of being able to look at like even, this idea of moving from a Newtonian understanding of leadership, which is very hierarchical and very control and domination oriented, to something that is much more decentralized and more like the murmurations of birds, right? In which we're more fluidly coordinating with one another. What does that look like and how is that possible? And quantum is a place where that becomes much more visible as a science way, I guess, of looking at it. And so those are to me that, we can look at it from storytelling, we look at it from leadership, we look at it from systems, we look at it from problem solving. Like there's all kinds of gateways and doorways that are going to open as we get more comfortable with this way of thinking and invite it in.
I mean, this feels like the perfect bridge between business and logical thinkers and into the spiritual world, because this is something I've been thinking about for a while. It's like how to bridge these two worlds together.
Well, and the third, which is the feminine, right? So for me, when I got the invitation to go do this talk, I was like, oh my gosh, all my worlds are now weaving together into the perfect moment. Like I was so excited about being able to have an invitation to go do this. And, my thinking is certainly continuing to evolve. I mean, this was like a one shot. Like it was, it wasn't the most fluid talk I ever gave because I was still trying to, deepen my understanding of these concepts too, but now I have a doorway that has been opened and I'm super excited about how they all weave together.
So you mentioned repatterning. What does this actually look like in the world?
I mean, again, this is the work that I'm super excited about right now because I think we have this huge opportunity. If you think about every single industry being up for redesign, healthcare, education, finance, retail, manufacturing, whatever it is, right? All of it is up for redesign because both the exponential technologies, hopefully a much more sensitive understanding of climate and what's happening with there, changing demographics and increasing consciousness, right? Those are the four drivers that allow us to rethink every single industry. And then around that, every single concept around identity, time, money, marriage, right? All of those things will be reconceived as we move forward. So if we have this opportunity right now, not to just add a technology layer onto it, but hopefully add a consciousness layer onto it, we have a chance to repattern it. We get to look at it through a different lens, right? And we get to look at it now through, again, the intelligences of feminine wisdom, indigenous wisdom, natural wisdom, and I would say again from youth, right? The sort of the unboundedness and the imagination and intelligence of youth to rethink how we move things away that are very static, that are very colonial, that are very allopathic, meaning that they think that they're all separate, they're not intertwined or interdependent and connected to one another. They are centralized versus decentralized. They're based on, again, old mythology around greed and around scarcity, as opposed to around the fact of abundance and sense of caring. So like these are all the ways that we can start to look at every single system around us from a different lens that isn't from this old industrial playbook, but is from this lens of whatever you want to call the quantum future gets to be.
So I'm wondering, like, how myself and I, how can I start thinking in that way or seeing things? I mean, my first thought was I should just have a Nancy GPT. Be like, here's my whole world, here's my business, here's my 4 kids, here's how I'm thinking, like, help me look at everything from a different lens. That's my first thought. But like, what are some other...
Well, it's funny because people who, this is not in any way to sound arrogant, but when they spend some time chatting with me, they do feel better, right? It's like they got something lifted for them, which is why we want to do this podcast now for parents, right? Futurist Mom podcast, I think will be really, really interesting because I think there are so many parents who are so worried about the future and can only see it from the place of things breaking down and don't understand the opportunities that it creates. So I think there is a bit of that. But I think it's what we said earlier today about language, right? And even understanding the language that you use for yourself, but also the way you talk about things from a non-dominance. Like, I don't say like, we're targeting something or we're going to kill it or we've got this arsenal. Like these are all words that I used to use. And instead I think, well, I've got a basket of opportunities, right? I have this invitation to someone. I have, that starts to change the whole reality of everything that you can see and that you can feel when you just start to really pay attention to how many of those words have been from an outdated concept or outdated understanding of what the world is or could be, and you really start to repattern your own thinking, right? It opens up all that. So now imagine that's a micro little thing that I get to do on a daily basis. I am also doing that with my children. So I'm having a very different experience with them. There's a very specific way I raised my children that was around a lot of these patterns that I was introduced to when they were young, which have continued to blossom as they've turned into young adults. But all those teeny little micro things turn into the big thing. And so then we get to start questioning our economic systems. We get to start questioning, again, the role that money plays in society and whether or not it is a debt-ridden society or one that we can think of as a sacred exchange. Like all of those concepts get to be rethought.
I love it. Yeah, I switched, this was maybe like a year or 2 ago, just one word in my day from have to get to.
Right.
And then I started feeling different, where it's like, oh, I get to go to the grocery store. I get to drive the kids 30 minutes to school. And all of a sudden I started seeing the kids shifting their language to that too. And it's like one is victim state versus another one is victor. And I get to do a lot of these things, even if most people might not think they're fun. Like, how do you speak about it?
Yeah, but there is, again, a privilege to be able to go do that. I went someone on a business trip when my first son was 8 months old, and I was just a bitch about the whole thing. Like, I didn't want to go all the way to Australia. I was whiny and cranky, and I was just like not in any way like somebody who wanted to go like be on a team with to be on a team with. And at some point I realized, the reason my colleagues aren't feeling is because they don't have something to miss the way that I do. How lucky am I that I have this little family that I'm going to really miss, but I get to come back to. And that changed everything when I went. I was a completely different person. That's when I realized, wow, the power of story, the power of the way that you frame it has such a giant impact on the rest. And so I check that all day long. Again, I am not in any way perfect. I'm certainly still learning and growing, which is cool. You can still do when you're 60. But and I also say, there's nothing that travels faster or that is more impactful than a story. There's no technology that works faster than a story. Right? So the story that you tell yourself, the story you tell yourself about what's possible, the story you engage in with others, and the framing that you bring to that has such tremendous potential. And again, we'll decide from a quantum, mechanics and philosophy perspective that is the thing that opens up then possibility. You can see something you couldn't see before. Right?
The science will catch up to it.
The observer changes, right? Because all realities are possible, and how you bring your own perspective to it opens up what you can see and what you can't, and what you can impact. And again, do I think this is going to be a super easy road? We're going to have mass job dislocation. And we, as many of your guests have already said on your podcast, are woefully unprepared for what that looks like. And let's open up that conversation now. Let's keep talking about the economic structures and systems that we need to reinvent, to repattern, to rethink in terms of being able to how to distribute goods and services to people in the future. That's what economies are for. Right? It's being able to ensure the equitable and hopefully sustainable distribution of those things, creation and distribution. So let's have that conversation as soon as possible, please. Because I think nothing but tremendous potential on the other side of this, but we have to think about it differently.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned your podcast earlier. I do want to hear more about that. Like, where is that coming from? Why do you want to get into this parenting space? Tell me more.
Well, it's funny because I haven't wanted to get into, I've been really reluctant. I didn't want to be a gender warrior, not necessarily be a parent warrior. I really love technology and business and society and solving the really big, juicy economic problems. I really would love to be, on an economic think tank thinking about renewable economic structures. However, right, the gaps that exist are in our understanding about how we get from here to there. And almost after every single talk I give, someone comes and asks me a question about their kids. How do we prepare my child, whether they are 20-something years old or 16 or 12 or 5 or 2, for this future that we're heading into, and how can I build a different kind of framing around it? And I think the reason that there's such high levels of anxiety for youth right now across all ages, including in their bodies, we're seeing it somatically, right, with lots of breakdowns happening there, is because the story around them is so negative. Both, in society, certainly all the science fiction stuff is, but also from their parents. And so if we can have a conversation with their parents, that is the one that I got to have raising my children. I was a futurist raising 3 children. I was a mom impacting the world as a futurist. Those things were so woven across both of those membranes, right? They both informed the other. There are many stories that I have of moments that I would have made a different parenting decision if I wasn't a futurist, right? And a different strategic decision I would have made if I wasn't a mom.
Yep.
And so how do I help other people see the opportunity that exists by being able to look a little further out, understand how things are shifting and changing, and bring that back into how it is that we, raise our kids and make them future ready, right? That's what we want to do, is make them feel as though they are prepared to enter the world at whatever stage it's in, and feel like they, again, are active participants in it, right?
Yep.
There are words that are stenciled on the wall of my house when you walk in that have been the blueprint for raising my children.
What is it?
It's wonder, thank, do, repeat.
That's
right?
good.
In big, huge letters. But raising kids that are able to really own their own curiosity, think about how many times that we stamp that out because we want them to learn what we want them to learn.
Yeah.
And because we think we're doing it for their own good, right? It's really important. And then, yes, I do want to teach them the things that they might be naturally gravitating to, because it's important for them to also know those things, but to really honor your own curiosity. It's as unique as your fingerprint, man. And it's so important that we hold on to that, as we keep saying again, as we move into this future, that it's going to be much less robotic and let's just, have to be in the system. It's really going to be creating your own innate position in the world. So you got to hold on to that. And certainly gratitude is a big, important part of all of this, but also gratitude for the people who can help you go do something with it. So gratitude for the download that you have that curiosity, and then the people who can help you do something, and then that sense of agency. And every time, how do you help kids feel that they can impact their world instead of robbing them from it?
Yep. I mean, to me, this is a very exciting future, especially parenting right now. And I mean, it is an interesting shift, even thinking how I grew up in education, of like, pick your path, pick your career,
right?
Stick with it. If you bounce around and you switch jobs,
right,
you're going to get
really good grades
up.
Are really, really important.
Yeah. And now I actually love that I'm raising kids right now in a space of like, well, what do you think? What do you like? What are you curious about? Oh, you have a lot of things you're curious about? Awesome. How do we stay with all of them? You don't have to pick one.
Right.
And I think that's the world that we're in right now. It's moving so quick. You really can't bet on one thing. You need to just be fluid and be able to like a lot.
Fluid is such a key word, right? I wrote an essay once about being status fluid, and this was too much jumbled into one essay. I haven't really quite taken it to ChatGPT to clean it up. But I really believe if we can stay in that place of fluidity, right, in terms of the way our work schedules work, our lives work, all these things work, all these structures that have been to be so solid, they're going to become much more dynamic is another word, right? Fluid, adaptive, like all these things. And so raising kids that have that natural innate capacity, which they have. If you look at any of their ways in which they are taught already, like 7 different teachers give them 7 different ways to do things, and they have to figure out how to, meet and please potentially 7 different teachers, which they're very comfortable doing. And then somehow it gets calcified as they get older. And so I also think it's a great time to raise kids. And I'm also really respectful. And I think this is why I waited this long to do this podcast, is because raising kids, mine are all now in their 20s, is really different than raising them at the age that yours are in, surrounded by so much technology, right? And so much input. around it. And then now imagine the next generation of parents are going to have kids that are raised with AI embedded everything, baby monitors that are going to, respond to their cry and put different things on the ceiling of the room if you can afford that technology for your nursery. And so the parents aren't even responding like the AI is responding. Like, what is that going to mean? Like, there's so many choices we're going to have to make. And so I wanted to make sure I wasn't going, well, in my day, this is how we did it. But really bringing in also other people and other theories around how to do this. And so it'll be a mixture of kind of my perspectives on this, but also certainly I have this massive, vast network of extraordinary people. We call them pinkers, people you need to know.
Okay.
That have influenced my work and my, the way I walk through the world. And so we'll invite pinkers to come share the conversations with us. And we're doing it in partnership with a new startup that is still in stealth mode, but someday we'll be able to share what it is, hopefully very soon, that is really using, AI and all of its capacities to be able to be a big life guide for people, right? So they can, it's like a GPT, but it won't be a Nancy GPT, but it will be a, how do I design my life kind of very, hopefully potent and very empathetic tool for people to have as a guide.
That's cool. Yeah. Something that's coming up for me now is like, so we were in the structure where we were told what to do and like, this is your path. And now we're kind of moving into a structure of like, how do you listen to yourself too and your own curiosities? And it seems like we're in these cycles that just keep happening of like, we're very intuitive back in the day. We're just listening to this and then we get out of it. And then we're told to go back to this again. And then someone sees what's working and they build a structure around it. And I mean, I was just having a conversation, you know what Reiki is, like Reiki energy work. And I was sharing that when I'm in certain spaces, this comes online and I know how to do it I've never been taught. It just happens. And someone's like, well, that's Reiki. All these courses that you see right now of people being like, if you want to do Reiki energy work on someone, 1, 2, 3, that's how you do it. They're like, that's actually not Reiki because that's a process.
Because we try to systematize it again, right? We're trying to put this into some sort of formula or some sort of thing that I can scale.
Yeah.
Right?
And like turn off your intuition and do it this way. And it's like, well, that's not what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be intuitive led.
Right.
And so I'm wondering how to strike this balance between listen to your curiosities and empower that without systematizing it and being like, well, here's now your 1, 2, 3 step guide of like what worked. It's like,
I know. And how do you transfer wisdom in a way that does take what you're learning and make it accessible to other people without telling them how to do it as a how-to. Like we've been very, very clear with any of the work that I do. There's never 5 easy steps to AI on Monday or 10 steps to be able to go do this. And certainly in the parenting world, the last thing would ever be is prescriptive about how to do things, because I think it is very, very unique to every family and to every person who's bringing it. But there are frameworks. And so maybe it's a difference between framing something versus structurally teaching someone how to. I always make again, as a strategist, the distinction between direction versus directives, right? I can point to direction and then that gives you like, keep running this way. But if I give you directives, once you run out of however many I gave you, you don't know what to do next because you don't understand the meaning behind it. And so I think there's a big thing to understand the meaning of something. And that's why there was, this particular parenting philosophy called RIE, that when I first learned it was very much like, and you do this and you do this and you don't do this and you don't do that. And then I went to go study with a woman who had actually developed it and understood her story about how she had come to it. And she was so natural and so fluent and so fluid, back to your point, right? And so I think anytime we learn something, we start to do it. Like when you learn to drive a car, I must put my blinker on now. I must turn my head now. I must be 10 feet away from this car now. Like we're very stiff until we become very fluent, right, in it. And then we become more fluid with it. And so I think, again, helping parents take in this information and make it their own. Like what fits your family values, right? What fits the way that you see it. But I see a lot of men and women that come up to me again after talks that are often looking in the rearview mirror about how they were raised and trying to figure out how to apply that to their children now and saying, is that really the thing that's serving them best now? The world is different. Right. And so how do you bring those values that you were raised with that you think are really important and express them in the world that is shifting and changing? It's just an invitation to look at it differently. I spent a lot of time as a new mom, man. I took so many classes. I learned so many things. I was surrounded by, I thought, really wise teachers. I didn't have a mom who could walk me through it and any aunts or grandparents. I was on my own. And so I was very fortunate to be patterned. This goes back to patterning, patterned by a really thoughtful group of people. And knock on wood, my children have turned out, as a shining example of what is possible when you are really, really conscious and intentional and think about it. And I can talk about, all the mistakes I've made too, but the good moments have outweighed those. So again, compassion.
Yep.
Compassion for self.
What would you, if you summed up your parenting in like a couple words, what would it be?
I think really those words that I had on the wall for my kids, for them to really walk into the world believing that their unique curiosity matters, that they have a tribe and a community around them that will always hold them safely, and that their impact matters, right? That they are here to create something that is meaningful, and that it's not a one-shot deal. It's just it's a process, just to trust themselves and to trust the world to hold them.
Yep. I love that. So with all these spaces that you're playing in and all your curiosities, what are some of the top books or, places that you follow, people you follow to keep you inspired?
So I think we mentioned already Extraordinary Knowing by Stephanie Meyer was a great book that I read several years ago. And I think it just helps us recall all of these wisdoms that we've suppressed for some terrible reason and that we now need more than ever. Riane Eisler has been a very, very influential person in my life. She's now a 93-year-old thinker, economist, author, attorney who's been very much at the forefront of bringing feminine experience into economic systems and helping us see how they're missing, but also talking about it in terms of our relationship with nature and extraction. And she's got all kinds of new models about how to think about that. So I think she's amazing. A good friend of mine currently just wrote a book called Employment is Dead, which I think the title is very scary, but she just presents, at least from a sort of basic future of working perspective, about how work will shift in the near future, which I think is also an encouraging book to get ahead of. And then I just love our Femme Futurist Society conversations. I think we get to meet with amazing people who are actively either as academics or as corporate executives or as entrepreneurs or as thinkers rethinking the future. And so I get very inspired every time we get to have a conversation with one of them.
Love it. Love it. With everything that you get to see every day, why are you still so optimistic and excited about where we're heading and what we get to do?
Well, because I'm a humanist more than I am an industrialist. So I think I would go there, right? That as a humanity, we're returning to so many of the things that I've cared about and loved a lot. I do get to spend time in Costa Rica with these 4 other women. We've bought a property that we are, or a piece of land, I should say, not a property, a piece of land that faces the Diamante Falls, and we're turning it into a center of regenerative healing for the guardians of the earth.
Wow.
Right? So I'm building something regenerative. And so I think that whether it's a garden, whether it's a child, whether it is a whatever, committing energy to something that you think is really growing and flourishing and can change the patterns, I think is really, really important. So I am surrounded by really extraordinary people who are questioning the current paradigms and offering solutions to what it could look like. And so I'm excited about that. And I think we're returning to a sense of how we want community to look, right? How we want our families to look, how our bodies are integrated with our environments, how we think about food. Like, I think what I was been most disappointed is the industrial era really reduced our experiences, right? It did lift us out of poverty. So you could argue there's a lot of really great things that happened as capitalism in the industrial era made more goods and services available to us. But I think we stripped out a whole bunch of understanding about how we work with each other and how we sit inside a much more complex system called nature. And I think that we are moving ourselves back to that. And when I spend time, as you do, right, with regenerative community people, whether that's in economics or agriculture or structures of any sort, it's very inspiring to see what's happening there, right? And the alchemy of what's happening there and the way that it's taking shape that looks very different than I think societies that we're most familiar with in the last 100 years look. So I get excited about all that's happening there. And I just want more people to be able to give themselves permission to question the current paradigm and open up to what is possible on the horizon.
How do we get on this Costa Rica trip?
It's great. We're building such an amazing face in anybody. Yeah, we would love to have more people out there. But I think it's being invited into something. And we're actually using it as a lab, thinking about holacracy in a really interesting way, thinking about distributed decision making, about the economic model of it, right? It's a community land trust, not an investment in terms of being able to cash out in 10 years. We're doing it very much in integration with the local community, the Tico community. We're offering something back. And we're really focusing on the female healers of the world to come and have a sanctuary to nourish and to, again, ignite the feminine code And because we're doing it, and this is going to sound so woo-woo, right? I can talk about AI too, right?
You don't have to preface it that way for me. At this point, you should know.
I can talk about, all the AI businessy stuff all day long, but we're also because we're sitting there at the facing this amazing waterfall, there's a consciousness that happens in water, right? And the distribution of that energy that has such power that feels incredibly, I feel so deeply privileged. All of us feel incredibly privileged to be a part of. And there's a whole learning that I'm going into of Pat McCabe's work and how she communicates with nature and water. And it's like a whole thing is opening up for me there as well. And honestly, to what we've been talking about through this whole conversation, reconnecting me to some really deep femininity in me, right? I have been a sole breadwinner. I have been the person who's taken care of everything in my life financially. I have been in these worlds where, again, I'm the only woman often in a room. And as much as I'd like to think I really showed up as, this very feminine woman, I'm deeply connecting to a way of knowing and learning that I have also not invited in and that I've suppressed. And so now I get to be all of this.
Yeah, I agree. And I would say the water piece, there's science behind it. Yeah. I mean, I think, what is it, the ions in the water that then you breathe them in, and especially moving water, of like how that can actually impact your body, and speaking words into water and like the frequency that it holds and how it moves.
The intelligence of it, exactly. And that it's been here for all of time. So that water has touched many, many, lifetimes. That's why I get all chills. Like we are part of a continuum of life. That has been in those waters. And again, the amplification of when we pray into water, what that means, because it goes into the sky, right? It becomes part of our whole humanity. If it nurtures our ground, like water's such an amazingly sacred thing. But so is all of nature. Like it's just, I can't imagine not being excited about being a human. I mean, like, I just think it's amazing. A fun time. And I have made, enough decisions in my life to be surrounded by really great people and to focus on the things that are really important to me, that I've been able to currently hold on to a really beautiful life. Who knows what it will look like and shake. But I'm also, because I'm afraid of being blindsided, I'm a futurist. Right? I always look ahead to make sure that I'm prepared for what's coming next. So that
but still that masculine in there, like, I need control. I need to know.
I grew up in a totally dysfunctional family, and I'm like, man, this isn't work. I want to really make sure that I'm well held on the planet. And so there's the right. It's, I think, the interesting dance between what do I control in that and what do I trust in the universe. And it's taken me a long time to heal some of the things that I had experienced when I was younger, to recognize that I'm very, very well held on the planet. Right. And to believe that is a really foundational thing. So when I start to get scared or I start to get nervous, I try and go back to sitting what it was like facing that waterfall and pulling out my oracle cards and having all of this wisdom pour through, going, wow, it doesn't get better than this. Right? What else am I looking for? So.
I think this is like such a beautiful reminder or invitation to women listening. I mean, I was in the same spot, very masculine, breadwinner, had to control every aspect, no trust in a universal plan or anything bigger than myself, really. Chaotic family, low income, and now moving into this space of trust and learning from other areas that's not as logical driven and masculine driven, and shifting into a different world now, which is... But
what still is really, I think, a deep intentionality, right? And with there's a great strength that you bring into a room, Stephanie, and but it comes of curiosity and of love, not of domination and power. And so I think that the strength is not, or femininity is not powerful. Right. We talked again about water, right? How powerful water is. Like, there's a strength and a power that comes from this sense of really owning all of the wisdom, intelligence, and experiences that we get to have, and holding each other in those moments when we forget that. That's also the power of women, is community, right? And that we get to be wonderful amplification and holding space for one another. And one of the most powerful things we did in Costa Rica last year was a grief circle, where we sat collectively grieving about the things that we are also experiencing and witnessing and losing, and being able to hold that, not by yourself, but in community with others, is really, really powerful. So I think we don't talk enough also about the emotions of loss and hospicing what we thought was going to happen or what we have seen be destroyed. And I think it's important that we also acknowledge that. I didn't find joy again until I had got through that circle.
Yeah, I did this at Burning Man, had a grief circle as well. And it's something I would have never gravitated towards, but because my community was doing it, I'm like, geez, fine, I'm here to have fun, but I'm about to go cry in the desert for what? And then afterwards, though, I mean, you need someone who's really good at facilitating to really get you there and trust, but very, very powerful of just coming out on the other side. Also like so much gratitude and excitement towards things. Being like, cool, got that out, process that.
Yeah. I didn't realize how much I've been holding that for years. Yeah. Right. And thinking like, no. And someone's asked me again how I can stay so optimistic. And I'm like, because finally y'all are all seeing the things that I have been talking about or feeling for over a decade, probably 20 years. Right. And trying to make sense of the food system that was poisoning people and trying to look at economic systems that weren't holding us well and looking at really extractive things and our reliance on pharma and all these things that I feel like now we're all going, yes. And I'm like, we're all here together now.
It's here. It's happening.
And the fact that we can grieve them together was really, really important to me. So yeah, I just think there's a lot. Just take a deep breath. I start every talk and I end every talk. Just take a deep breath. Right. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 6 seconds out. You do that multiple times and it's all good. It's all gonna be okay. We're good. We're good. That. Right? Yeah. And the more that we can find each other and hold space that way, I think we'll be fine.
This is the best way to wrap up such a beautiful episode. Nancy, thank you for coming in today, going into all these different topics and areas. And I loved how we got to weave and bob.
I look forward to seeing what the title of this is.
Me too. We'll find out when Lacey and my team listens to it and decides for us. But until next time, where can people learn more about you and your work and what you're up to?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is always the place where I'm probably the most active, just because I trust the platform, and because I love the other people that I get to follow there. Again, the pinkers that I'm involved with, there's a lot of great sharing that I think happens there. It's probably the most, and it's the person where I'm most reliable at following up. So, and then we have nancygiordano.com, and then we put a bunch of our content that we were doing it the first of every month. Now we're going to do it every quarter, but we do a new story gathering online where people can come and join us for free online. So we'll do the next one will be June 1st and then September 1st. And so I invite people to come into the new story and be part of it and feel it and see it evolving right in front of us right now.
Amazing. Well, with that, thank you so much. This was fun.
Thank you.